Hello, you are listening to the Natural Healing Show for UK Health Radio. I'm your host, Catherine Carrigan, medical intuitive healer and Amazon #1 best-selling author. You can find out more about me and my work at catherinecarrigan.com and unlimitedenergynow.com. While you're there, definitely sign up for my newsletter so you can learn even more about how you can heal yourself naturally. Now, our guest today is one of my favorite people, and an expert, a true expert in his field that we have interviewed before here on the Natural Healing Show for UK Health Radio. I'd like to welcome again Dr. Paul J. Leslie. Dr. Paul J. Leslie is a psychotherapist, author, and educator, and we're talking about his seventh book, The Art of Creating a Magical Session. Welcome, Dr. Paul J. Leslie.
Well, thank you, Catherine. It's always great to see you and talk to you and just be around you. You're one of my favorite people. And so anytime we get to chat, it's a good time.
Now, we really need to give everybody your website so they can find out more about you and your 7 books. And I know you're working on an 8th book as well, and
Right.
your wonderful work. So what is your website?
My website is www.drpaulleslie.com, and that's DRPAULLESLIE.com. And on there, you'll find a link to my books, my online training courses, and a link to coaching that I do with a variety of people.
Fabulous. Now, Dr. Paul J. Leslie, your 7th book is The Art of Creating a Magical Session. What do you mean by creating a magical session in therapy and coaching?
Well, for me, I look at this term magic slightly different than a lot of people think of. Because when you hear magic, you hear people think quickly of illusionists like David Copperfield and that, or they go to the realm of the occult where there's ritual magicians and those kind of things. But to me, when I use a magical session or the term magic, I looked it up in the dictionary, and it really means kind of something that's removed from everyday life, something that has a sense of enchantment and wonder about it. And reason I kind of went in this direction is that I started to notice that when people were in the healing professions, particularly the field of therapy, coaching, hypnotherapy, those kind of things, there's a big push, rightly so, to be effective, and people want to have effective sessions. But I noticed there was this tier of practitioner that tended to do more than just be effective. They tended to be what I'll call transformational, meaning that effective is that your problem is solved or it's better, and that's great. But when you're with certain people and doing certain things, there's more than just effectiveness. To me, a transformational session is where the client and maybe even the practitioner are truly changed down to the core of who they are, how they see themselves. So they're no longer quite the same, other than just a behavior or an emotion being changed. There's this experience of something that is out of the ordinary to where it is more life-changing. So hypothetically, if someone goes to a therapist and says, they're going for help with their anxiety, at the end of the time with the therapist, however sessions that takes, they say, well, my anxiety is either gone or it's manageable. Well, that's wonderful. But there are these practitioners who are able to create a sense of wonder in the session that even if the anxiety they're managing it, it's still there, that person's relationship to their problem and to themselves is so transformed that's where, to me, healing took place. Because healing oftentimes is not strictly the removal of a symptom. Because I mean, some things we can never just remove the symptom. Here's an example. If unfortunately someone has their child die, you know, I can't solve that problem. That's something that's, I mean, it just is. But if I can help facilitate a way for those grieving, excuse me, those grieving parents to change their relationship to what's happened so it's manageable, they find meaning in it and wisdom and a way to grow as people, I mean, that's healing. I think this idea that healing is always a removal of a symptom is kind of a rather linear approach to things that you and I do, based on kind of what we call the medical model, which works a lot of times with a lot of things. For example, a broken bone. There's a linear approach to mending a broken bone, setting it, getting make sure infection doesn't happen, those kind of things. But human beings are so complex when we put in the realm of the emotions and the thoughts and those things that this linear approach doesn't always work. And for me, something that's a transformational process that feels magical. When you're sitting with a practitioner and they show you things about themselves, about yourself that you've never experienced, or you experience whatever the problem is in a totally different way, or they just say or do something totally unexpected that shifts the perception you have. You come back a slightly different person, and you may even feel sitting with that person is magical. And so that's kind of what I meant by having a magical session compared to just having an effective session. Because to me, a magical session is not only transformational, it's also effective. So it's kind of like that next step above.
I just love exactly what you're saying, Dr. Paul J. Leslie. And I have two comments. One is my second book, What is Healing? Awaken Your Intuitive Power for Health and Happiness. I talk about what is healing.
Right.
And,
right.
and it's exactly what you just said. Yes, the bone is mended, but it's really a return to wholeness.
Right.
A return to wholeness. And again, what is wholeness? You and I could have a whole great philosophical discussion about that, but I want to give an example from my work that is going to be more in the realm of natural healing, about what you're talking about, magical.
Right.
Because I have 28 years experience in natural healing. And some of what I do is I work with my power animals and I work with my clients' power animals. Well, my primary power animal is the snow leopard. And snow leopards, one of their primary qualities is they're great leapers. They can leap long distances easily with grace. And part of what I do in my work as a medical intuitive healer is I literally empower people to leap over their problems. It was like, what? Did I have a problem with that? So, and the way I envision that is sometimes I visualize myself or my client on the back of the snow leopard, literally leaping out of a pit. So maybe you've fallen into the pit of despair.
Right.
And you get on the back of the snow leopard and you leap over that issue, which is it's absolutely magical.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Dr. Paul J. Leslie, you have decades of experience writing books, teaching, and also as a psychotherapist. How did you come to become interested in what creates actually transformational sessions?
Well, it's a very long story, but I'm going to make it really short. But it's one of those things that you never know where life is going to take you. I moved here to where I live in South Carolina in the United States, southeastern United States, back in 2008. And when I arrived here,
I'm going to interrupt. You're in Aiken, South Carolina, and please, we want to hear the story.
Okay.
You don't have to make it short.
Okay. Yeah, I live in a little town called Aiken, South Carolina, and I didn't know much about the Carolinas and until I moved here, and it's a lovely little town. But when I started going into practice in this area, I would go to these supervision groups for other therapists, who are trying to get licensed and those things. And some of the people we were mentoring and working with would sometimes occasionally tell us little stories about situations that they encountered that they didn't know what to do with. And one particular occasion was this young therapist who was having trouble with this man who was having severe panic attacks. And he stated that to the therapist that the reason he was having a panic attack was that someone had put the root on him. Now, I then found out after, trying to figure out what that meant, putting the root on them is tied to what we would call hoodoo, not voodoo with a B, but hoodoo with an H, which is the magical and healing system that a lot of the African Americans, descendants of slaves, practice. Not all of them do, but some of them do, and it's a very hidden tradition. And they use as a way to improve the quality of their lives, for healing, those kind of things. But in some cases, putting the root meant it's like putting a curse on someone. So this man, whether it's true or not, believed that somebody had put a curse on him and was having these panic attacks. Well, the linear scientific mind I had, I know what panic attacks are and know how to treat them, but as did this young therapist, and she was trying to treat it, but nothing seemed to work because he had it set in his mind that he had been cursed. So all I could tell her was that she needed to find somebody who was skilled, or at least pretended to be skilled in removing curses, because until he had someone do that to him, his mind would not let him go from this belief, whether it's true or not. But that set me on a journey trying to figure out this tradition of hoodoo in this area we call the Low Country, which is the coastal South Carolina, North Carolina, Georgia areas where this vibrant culture still, even though it's hidden, is still going on. So I did a lot of research, and I talked to a lot of people, and I found out that there was a lot of similarities between hoodoo doctors, as they call them, or root doctors here, and psychotherapists. Not the actual techniques or anything like that, but what I found was that those therapists that I had learned from and mentored and watched and read about, who were creating those transformative magical sessions, they were doing something similar to these root doctors or hoodoo doctors. And what I found was that one of the big things was the root doctors always created an experience that was so different than that person's daily experience. It was so far removed from that daily interaction. And I noticed that a lot of times in my field of therapy or coaching or those kind of things, it's real easy for us to fall into the idea that if we just give someone information, that's automatically going to change them. Well, when more we learn about the human brain, we find that our brain, that part of our brain that's the real conscious, logical part of the brain, is great for problem solving. But a lot of our emotions and kind of somatic problems are rooted more in that unconscious realm that only tends to be altered if that person is having a unique experience, something out of the ordinary. And for me, this was an eye-opening moment, in that the root doctor, you go to them, they don't just sit there and say, well, it's a curse, and let me tell you about the curse. No, they would create all kinds of rituals, ceremonies. Just sometimes their presence alone would be something that could jumpstart this healing in someone. And I was led to a book of which title I cannot remember, but I do remember the authors. It's two psychologists, Bohart and Tallman, and they have asserted that all healing, as far as psychological healing, is generally on the realm of the client's self-healing. They are doing the healing. So what is therapy? Therapy or coaching is a process that activates the self-healing in the client. So when the root doctor is doing his or her performance, and therapy is a performance, if you look closely enough, you'll see that it can be. Um, that the experience was, that alone was enough that it's out of the ordinary to shift the way the person perceived their problem, to give them a sense of hope or an expectancy that change will happen. Whereas just two people sitting and talking and trying to logically reason out things, it can be effective, like we're talking about before, it's effective. But to be truly transformational, we have to go beyond just talking and create the conditions for magic to emerge. As one of the hoodoo doctors told me, he said, I don't do anything. The magic does it, but I have to create the conditions for the magic to occur. So with that being said, it really got me thinking, well, if we'll just take out the word magic, put in the word healing, emotional healing or whatever, then we as practitioners, there's really very little that we can do directly. And it's this co-creative experience that we're starting to create, this experience that the client is a part of. And since the client is activating his or her own inner healing due to our interaction with them, that's changing the whole dynamic of I'm doing something to you, the client. It's we're doing something together, but we're doing something at this emotional experience level rather than this linear cognitive level. And in my research as a therapist, I found that after 20 years of research on all the major theories, all the major techniques, they found when they strip everything apart and they really look at what creates change in psychotherapy, it's not the theory or the technique. That only counted for maybe 10 to 15% of change. The bulk of it is the therapeutic relationship, the interaction, creating a sense of expectancy of change, giving your clients a sense of hope, just being supportive and being emotionally attuned. That more than anything accounted for the change. So for me, this journey has been looking at this amazing culture that I've been honored for these people to share this information about this magical healing system with me. But then I found that it's really all the same at this higher level of we're doing things to create an experience that creates the conditions for this healing and change to occur.
Very profound and fascinating information, Dr. Paul J. Leslie. Now, what are the common elements that you find in creating a magical session?
Mm. Well, the first thing I find is that every one of the what I think of as the greats in my field, or even when I've watched master coaches or leadership people, other healers, before they do anything, there has to be a deep level of connection, rapport, and trust. That cannot, healing, in my opinion, can't occur. Now, I didn't say that they like you or you like them. But down deep, if they know that you are there as a healing practitioner to support them and to do everything that you can within reason to assist them on their healing journey, they're really inclined to go with you. Now, some people it takes a little longer due to, trust issues that they have that had nothing to do with you. But if you just are able to present that hope, that comfort, and that connection, that alone will create magical sessions. I mean, one of the top psychotherapies of the 20th century was known as person-centered therapy. It was created by a psychologist named Carl Rogers, and his whole theory, for the most part, was to just give people a space to be who they are. He never tried to intentionally direct them to do anything. He just said, this is where you are. I'm here to listen and to be supportive. And that was it. And what they found is amazing transformation can take place. So if you go in with that idea that everybody is doing the best they can with where they are, and you go into with your client and you give them a space where they feel safe, and also that they can be authentic, so they can bring forth those parts of themselves. And I'll even say this, that you can be somewhat authentic as well, because if you're having to hide who you are and your personality from your clients, then you're probably in the wrong field, because we want to know. I mean, speaking of myself as a therapy and coaching client, I want to know who somebody really is. And I'll just say this, Catherine, I've known you for many years, and times where I've sought you out for your advice, I've always known that you are as open as anybody I've met, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I think that's one of the things I think your clients respect about you so much, because you are authentic. I remember one time you said something about, I did something. He said, "Yeah, that was a big screw up, and I've made plenty of those screw ups." And it was kind of fun and funny, but in a way, it's not just being a good friend, but it's giving clients permission to be themselves. Because when you give yourself permission to be yourself, it's almost infectious. It's like unconsciously saying, "Come on, share more with me." And to me, those are the things that really start the foundation. Now, on top of that, I mentioned earlier this expectancy. I cannot undersell this, because when you give your clients the expectancy that change can occur, that alone is healing. Sometimes when we get stuck in life, ups and downs, and we're in the downs, we may feel that nothing will ever change. The reason that people reach out to both of us is they feel, whatever it's physical or mental, emotional, they feel it's not going to end. So if you can give them the expectancy that this will end, or even if it's not going to end, how you relate to it will change for the better, that alone can create a change in clients. It's kind of like, I don't want to call it a placebo, because it's not. I mean, you can actually measure these things. But when people take a placebo pill in a drug trial, experiment, and they get better, that's that self-healing being activated. So by giving the expectancy that something can change quickly and rapidly in some cases, that alone is enough to really start building that foundation, strong foundation for magic to occur. And I think those are the basics. That's what really, I mean, there's many other things certainly, but that's the foundation of creating the conditions for a magical session.
Fascinating information. Now, Dr. Paul J. Leslie, according to your research, what actually does not work when it comes to coaching and healing work?
What I found, this is a great question. And for the record, all the things I say, I'm going to be here authentic and say I've screwed up and done a lot of these.
As
So, yeah. So the first thing is to focus more on your technique than the person. That's one of the things that yields very little results, because as I mentioned earlier, in the field of common factors, which is this enormous body of research about what works in therapeutic interaction and what doesn't, technique and theory is one of the smaller aspects that creates change. But when you're so, as I say, so married to a technique that you try to fit your client into, you're already at odds with what may be happening with your client. You start to take the position that you know better than your client. In some cases, you may know some information your client doesn't know, but if your client really is going to be activating this unconscious self-healing, their body, their mind knows how to heal. Our job isn't to force them into anything, it's to create these conditions for that self-healing to happen. So first, this idea that I have to do a certain technique or a certain theory, that's very limiting, because not every technique and not every theory works all the time. In my field of psychotherapy, unfortunately, at least here in the United States, there's a real push for people to grab hold of a certain theory, and a lot of its proponents say, it's an evidence-based theory, where if you really look at all the major theories of therapy, they're all evidence-based. And a lot of the studies have not really been the final word on something works all the time. So having an open mind toward what your client is giving you. One of my therapeutic heroes is a psychiatrist known as Dr. Milton Erickson, who was a renowned hypnotherapist and I think a great healer. And he introduced this concept called utilization. And that simply means whatever your client is giving you, rather than try to force them out of it or argue them out of it or something, why not figure out a way to use it as a way to create healing for them? One of his most famous stories is that Erickson had, when he was head of the psychiatric unit at a hospital in Michigan, there was a patient that nobody could help. The patient swore he was Jesus Christ, and everyone tried to get him to stop being Jesus, and drugged him, and it didn't work. So one day, Erickson said to himself, I need to get him out of his room and out of this limited existence. I need him to interact with people, which I think will help him. So he went into the man's room and he says, I'm Dr. Erickson. I'm the director of the hospital. I've heard that you used to be a carpenter. So he was playing on this idea of, Jesus Christ was originally a carpenter. And he said, I need some help. I have a group that I'm starting for other people to build things and repair things. And I think you could be of enormous help to me with your background. So the fact that he used the man's belief helped get the man out of his room, out of causing trouble, started interacting with more people. And in time, his symptoms got better. He started feeling more like himself, his true self, and eventually with other work was able to leave the hospital. So if we go in with a technique and a theory and we say we have to use this and we have to force this on someone, it's hit and miss. And when people feel they're being directed too much or being manipulated or forced, automatically you've lost those things that are most important, which is that rapport, that connection with another person. And the other aspect of what not to do is something that you would think that all therapists are good at, and that's empathy. Mm-hmm. Most therapists overall, that's where they struggle the most. And it's not that they're bad people or they're rude or mean, but it's really difficult when you're a therapist, when you're a coach, when you're any kind of healing practitioner, because we get some challenging personalities. And we also have a tendency to see things that they can't see in the moment. And we feel like we have to okay, stop. You're stuck in your story. Stop it. Can't you see, and it's real easy for us to do it. And I've done that before, and it went horribly, and I still feel bad about it today. But I learned from it and tried to move on and hopefully maybe a better therapist. But it's really easy for us to lose rapport, particularly with people that challenge us. So when we don't bring the empathy and that idea that the client knows best about themselves and how to work with those and utilize it, the therapy becomes very difficult. Coaching can become very difficult. Any type of healing, if you're already trying to force somebody, you don't care about how they're feeling, and you're not processing what's going on with them, you're already at a disadvantage in creating that magical session you might like.
Great information. And I have two stories, one of which is really funny about what you just said, because I've done natural healing for 28 years. And I remember after I took my mentor in healing, I took her internship for the first time. And this is a very intensive program where you're learning multiple techniques, many techniques, and including about literally how to heal the brain. And I learned techniques, for example, on how to reset the neurotransmitters in the brain, how to balance your pituitary gland, your pineal gland, your corpus callosum. And so here's the funny story. So I studied very hard. I came back. I worked with my clients for an entire year. And then, because I'm very avid about my healing work, I went back and took the entire internship again. And when I repeated my training, and this is the funny part, what I realized is that I'd been adjusting everybody's brains backwards. But everybody got better. I was like, wait a minute. I learned this technique and I did the technique totally wrong. However, my intention was so clear that everybody got better. And
Right.
I would adjust their pineal, their pituitary, their corpus callosum. They would come back a week later, or 2 weeks later, and I would check everything, and everything was better. I was like, oh, that worked.
Mhm.
So even though I was doing the technique technically incorrectly, and of course, once I repeated the internship the second time and actually did the internship not just once, but 4 times. So I got, okay, I'm very clear on my techniques now. But
Mhm.
again, it's not the technique, it's your intention, it's the connection,
Right.
it's being real and the empathy. And then the second thing is, in my background, what I've learned to do was to, because I know all these techniques. I don't even know how many techniques I know. Who
Mhm.
cares, right?
Right.
But when I'm working with somebody, I'm asking at their soul level, I'm asking for my soul to their soul, what is the technique that's going to bring about the transformation? And I don't care what it is,
Mhm.
right? So we have a goal to make more money, to be less depressed, to be less anxious. And I have literally zero attachment to what is the tool.
Right. Right.
My attachment, if there is one, is this connection with the client. So I'm
Right.
clearing the energy beforehand, and making this empathetic connection, this, and clearly clearing the energy between us so that they can receive the healing, and then asking at the soul level, what does this person need?
Mhm. Right.
And it's
Right.
very interesting because sometimes the simplest little thing that you wouldn't think would make any difference at all brings about profound transformation.
Yes.
And at other times, there are things that you think, oh, this is an easy problem. We'll be done with this today.
Right. Right.
And
Yeah.
sometimes those seemingly easy problems, it's like, okay, well, that's going to take 5 or 10 sessions because it's so involved and so wound up in
Mhm.
the physical, energetic, emotional, mental, and spiritual.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that non-attachment to uh, anything other than being present and helping. I think I'd like to see more research in that realm because it's so easy that I think our desire to control, we want to jump in and, oh, here's our tool. And as opposed to just, let's see what happens. That's why I stopped reading when people were referred to me from other psychiatrists or psychologists or whoever, medical doctors anyway. I never wanted to read their chart. I wanted to just meet them. And 9 out of 10 times when I go and read their chart, it was so much worse. It would have made me terrified to talk to them. It was like the worst. But then just by saying, here I am, and interacting, it was amazing what could happen if I hadn't already been influenced by some outside perceived authority that said, now you need to do this and this way, and they have this disorder. So just being able to let go a little bit, I think you're very wise in many ways.
Yeah. So one of the things that I do is I do medical intuitive readings for a healing center in Costa Rica. And the person sends their photograph and fills out their form. And when I do these readings, I do my work prayerfully, I get quiet, I look at the person, and I literally ask for my soul to their soul, what is it this person needs to hear, needs to know from me right now?
Mhm.
And then I spend an hour and a half writing a report, what's happening on the physical, energetic, emotional, mental, and spiritual level. And I hear all the time afterwards from the people at the healing center, they go, well, the person thought you Googled them. I never Google anybody.
Mhm.
And actually what I found is my medical intuitive readings actually work best if I'm not even talking to the person.
Hmm.
I don't want their ego to get in their way. And it's just like, okay, My soul is asking you, what do you need to know right now? What do you need? What resources do you need in order to bring about profound transformation? And when you get the ego out of the way and just really listen, it's like, and then people go, wow, you know me better than my best friend who's known me for 20 years. But
Mm.
I'm not asking, as you know, people have so many ego facades, and that really gets in the way. So, Dr. Paul J. Leslie, in your professional opinion, what limits the therapists and coaches the most from generating magical moments in their work?
Well, some of it we've already discussed, and so I'm going to build on it. The first thing is, again, a rigid adherence to a technique or theory. That would be number one. And then I'll take it a step further, rigid adherence to anything other than good ethics and compassion, Um, there is a real desire, and I think it's kind of our Western brain, is that we want things standardized. We want things to go in a step-by-step format. But life doesn't work that way. That to me, a step-by-step format is really a way we learn, but to actually perform, we need something else. So, for example, if you want to learn to play basketball, you first you're a kid, you have to stand still for a minute to learn how to dribble, and then you try to walk dribbling, then you run dribbling, and then you have to learn to shoot. So you have drills to shoot, and then all these things you do. But then after a good bit of time of training, when you actually get in the game, the way that you're dribbling, the way you're shooting, the way you're running, all these things, you cannot plan any of it. And the reason is because there's this thing called the other team. And they have their own agendas and their own skill sets and attributes. And unfortunately, a lot of times in the healing arts, people are given these systematic templates to help people. And I'm not saying that they can't sometimes help. I mean, sometimes something's better than nothing. But to really get beyond just being effective to transformational magical, it requires an abandonment of all clinging on to standardized measures, rigid protocols. Sometimes it means allowing your intuition to come through and just doing something that sounds totally bizarre initially, but then leads to profound growth. I remember one time sitting with a man in a session, and we're talking, and then a bird flies up on the windowsill and is just loud. God, this bird's so loud, singing, singing, singing. And something in my gut just said to talk about the bird, even though this guy's unpacking all his issues. And I said, that bird seems to be singing, and it's almost like he's left his cares, and just is enjoying singing. And I asked him, where in your life are you singing? And then he thought a little bit metaphorically, and then we eventually literally created a song for him to sing. Sounds a little silly, but it's a song that we wrote kind of together for him, and with a little melody, that when he was getting into a certain state, he would sing this song, and that would help kind of remind him of being free, like that singing bird that just happened to be on the windowsill. Now, that would not work with my previous client that day, or the one after, or the one after. It only worked in that moment for that one individual. So by creating these conditions, it also means opening up to our own intuition, our own gut, and trusting ourselves. And this is something that most of us don't do very well, particularly when we're working with other people, to heal, because we're always worried we're going to mess them up more, or do the wrong thing, or not be effective. But I found that if in time, any practitioner can go not with you talked about the ego, but with the heart and the gut, and say, okay, what am I feeling compelled to do? Is it out of necessity and fear, or is it just feel like that's something that just needs to happen? And then the second part of that is, and when you do put something out there and it doesn't work, just keep going. Feel like you're an improvisational performer. when an improv comic is just doing and the joke fails, he doesn't stop and go, wow, that was awful. That technique didn't work. And he or she just keeps moving. They go on to the next thing. So whatever you're putting out, if it sticks, as they say, keep going. If it doesn't, move to something else. Sometimes it may even be, and a lot of times, not even talking about the problem. The more we talk about problems, the more problems we have. After someone has told you their story and you've honored that story and given them that space, as we talked about, of empathy and safety and connection, there comes a point where if we keep delving into the story constantly, we only, by even just talking about it, we're reinforcing the very thing that they really need to move their attention away from. So it may be that in the middle of a session, you notice your client is wearing a certain type of clothing that's interesting. Why not just change the subject for a moment to ask them about their jacket? What do you like about that jacket? Now, are you somebody who sees style? Because you seem like a very stylish person. Maybe that's the part of the problem. You don't have enough style in your life. Let's talk about that. That's leading them into an area of their life that they may have a resource or a strength or a curiosity that you're activating that pulls their attention away from so much focus on the problem, but may actually give them that inner resource to deal with their problem more effectively. But again, we can't know this for sure because everybody who comes into our office is a unique individual. And if we are trying to fit people into these templates, well, it worked on client number 7, number 12 should work the same way. We're going to feel a lot of disappointment, as will our therapist. So learning to trust yourself, learning to have that intuition, I think is just is really crucial for many different reasons.
So, Dr. Paul J. Leslie, I have many clients who are therapists and coaches who find themselves facing burnout in their profession. What advice do you give to therapists and coaches who are listening, who want to become more magical and reconnect with their inner healer, but don't know where to begin?
Mhm. Well, I think that's a perfect segue from what I just said. Is a lot of times when we are going to burnout, either we're just working too much anyway, but in our kind of work, it's that maybe we're trying to solve problems. And we think that's our job, is to solve people's problems. And it's framed that way. You know, I got a problem, I got to go to the coach or the therapist or the hypnotherapist or the natural healer to solve my problem. But if our goal is really just to create an interaction and conditions for that person to activate their own healing, internal healing, then it changes a little bit. Anytime someone does something and it's in the context of a problem, nothing that happens inside that context or that frame is going to be different because it's framed as a problem. It's only when we move clients outside of that into these other, as I was mentioning, these other resources. So if someone comes in and says, I have a problem, they have framed a situation, a feeling, something as a problem in their mind. And so no matter what solution you give them, it can help a little bit, but it's still stuck inside that frame of a problem. So it may be that our job is to change that frame or take them outside the frame or to make them do things within the frame that makes absolutely no sense. So then the whole frame doesn't even register anymore. You can do lots of different things, but the more we focus on illness, the more we focus on sickness, or as we say in my field, pathology, the more of that we get. And then we feel like we are absolutely tied to coming up and healing and solving people's problems. And we have the weight of the world. And then when things aren't working, then we get frustrated with our clients and we get all this burnout, as opposed to just, saying, well, let's see what happens here. Let's play with this. Let's see, what haven't I talked about? One time I had a client I'd seen 3 times, weren't getting anywhere. I said, okay, let's change seats. You get up, you be the therapist, and I'm the client. And I told him about a problem I was having, nothing serious, like a little work thing. And by them giving me advice and directives as a therapist, amazing thing happened. They somehow got that resource and started kind of figuring out things on their own. So there's so much to say about this, but I think the more that we take on people's burdens, take on their problems, without remembering that this isn't for us to do things to people, but it's to interact with them and co-create new outcomes, because you both got to be working in there. That's the best way to avoid a lot of the burnout.
Yeah, that's a great observation. And I'll put it in, this is how I tell the story. So if I use, so whenever we, any of us look at another human being as having a problem,
Mhm.
then the person that you're thinking about, they go weak, and you
Mhm.
go weak also. But if I see that person as whole, and by whole I mean complete, as by whole I mean having a deep connection to everything they need, even if it's just a phone number.
Mhm.
Like they have Dr. Paul J. Leslie's phone number or website, and that's the only resource they actually need in order to get better, right?
Mhm. Right.
So when you see people as whole, then I, as a practitioner, stay grounded, I stay centered, I stay happy. And then the other person can experience their own wholeness and their own authentic self.
Mhm.
So I think you're really onto something, because it really is about how we see people,
Right.
and how we show them. I remember one time somebody who years ago who was talking to me, explaining to me about my psychic gifts and about my angels. I'll never forget. She said to me, Catherine Carrigan, you have the ability to tell a person the worst thing about them in the most delightful way. It's like, you're a mass murderer. You know, you didn't,
Yeah.
you know, you
Right.
have this tendency, and here's what we can do about it.
Right. Right.
And so again, and that requires, again, I'm whole, the other person's whole, they may be experiencing symptoms, they may be struggling, but it's seeing them as whole while remaining whole, having that deep, caring, empathetic connection, and asking at that soul level, what does this person need to experience transformation? So
Mhm.
Dr. Paul J. Leslie, author of your 7th book, The Art of Creating a Magical Session, any final thoughts for our audience?
The only really thing I just want to emphasize, particularly to if anyone listening out there that's a coach, a therapist, any type of healer, is start working on trusting yourself more. And that's something that's easier said than done. But I think when we give ourselves permission to be healers, permission to help others, we can let go a lot of this outside narratives that we pick up about what we're supposed to do, and you need to be like this other person, and tune into our own uniqueness and authentic self, and trust that self, because generally, if we've been alive long enough, it's picked up quite a few lessons that can supply amazing information if we let it.
You've been listening to the Natural Healing Show for UK Health Radio. I'm your host, Catherine Carrigan, medical intuitive healer, Amazon #1 bestselling author. You can find out more about me and my work at catherinecarrigan.com and unlimitedenergynow.com. While you're there, definitely sign up for my newsletter so you can learn even more about how you can heal yourself naturally. Our guest today has been Dr. Paul J. Leslie, psychotherapist, author, and educator. And you can find out more about Dr. Paul Leslie at drpaulleslie.com. And remember, when you're totally present with yourself and other people, magical transformation can occur. Thank you so much for listening to the Natural Healing Show, and we'll see you next time.